Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be giving you 6 beginner romance recommendations. This video was inspired by a few of my lovely viewers who have requested this video. I feel like most people who watch my channel have at least a passing interest in romance, but I know that there are at least a few of you who have showed a little bit of interest in romance but just aren't really sure where to start, and I thought I would put this video together for you or for anyone who, comes onto my channel, is interested in what I read but doesn't really know where to start and doesn't want to necessarily start with like the smuttiest thing ever. So if you like YA fantasy, I've got a recommendation for you. If you like true crime, I've got a recommendation for you. I have 6 recommendations in that vein and I will be pushing them towards you. And hopefully you will find at least one book that you are interested in picking up if you've never read romance before. So first off, for my classics lovers and lovers of all things historical fiction, we have Brook by Julie Ann Donaldson. This book should come as no surprise to anyone who has regularly watched my channel. I really love this book. This book is about our heroine, Marianne Daventry, and she is living in the city with some family members and she's not having a great time. She desires the countryside, she loves nature, she really wants to be free to roam and free to twirl. Twirling is a thing that's going to happen a lot in this book. She loves to twirl around in her big dresses. So Marianne gets this invitation from her sister who is away in the countryside trying to catch a man to marry, and she invites Marianne to come to the countryside and kind of chaperone her sister as she embarks on finding a man, because it's the olden days and you have to have a chaperone, right? So Marianne definitely takes it upon herself to do this. She's super excited. Finally, she gets to go to the country like she's always wanted, but unfortunately on her way there, she's accosted by a highwayman. So her carriage is upturned and she is scared for her life until she is saved by a handsome mystery man. Now, as I'm sure you could guess, this handsome mystery man is actually her sister's suitor, and so Marianne, over the course of the story, has to fight her growing attraction for this gentleman and also has to kind of grapple with her feelings about herself and feelings that she has for her sister. It's very much a story about, family relationships, family bonds, building your own self-confidence, and then also going after what you want. I just love the story. It is so delightful, and it's a book that I often pitch as Anne of Green Gables meets Pride and Prejudice. There's such immense whimsy in the writing, and I feel like if you are used to classics or historical text, especially something like Pride and Prejudice, this will definitely appeal to you. I wouldn't say the writing's inaccessible, but it definitely feels a little bit different than some of the modern historicals out there right now, like the Tessa Dares and the Sarah MacLeans. So I think if you're looking for something that's really sweet and heartwarming, that has a really gentlemanly man at the forefront, a lot of hand flexing, and absolutely no explicit sex, I think this is a book that you should pick up, and I think it's a book that you're really going to enjoy. Definitely go into it with the notion that it is a little bit silly and whimsical. I wouldn't recommend this to a cynic, but I think if you're looking for something that is just going to be lighthearted and a really fun time, I think this is an amazing first book to read in romance. Next up is a book and or series for my fantasy lovers out there. I have Burn For Me by Ilona Andrews on this list. Now, this is the first book in the Hidden Legacy series, and it follows our heroine, Nevada Baylor. Nevada is a detective living in Houston, Texas, and she is trying to keep her family afloat after her father passes away. So when Nevada gets contacted for this extremely dangerous job where she is tasked with capturing a very notorious villain and or magic user, she has to take this very dangerous job because she's going to make a lot of money and it's going to help save her family. And in doing so, she ends up teaming up with another notorious magic user, Mad Rogan, and they have to kind of work together against their better judgment to capture this ne'er-do-well. And this first book is full of magic and fun. I feel like it sets up our world and our relationships really well and convincingly. The writing is kick-ass. The romance is super slow burn. You don't get any sort of explicit sex in this first book, and only the hint of romance really in this first book as well. If you're looking for something where it's not just going to be them jumping into bed together, this might be the romance for you. The reason that I recommend this one so highly though is because of the way that the story is told. I feel like I've had a pretty rough go of it when it comes to fantasy romance. I've read some of the more popular ones that are being recommended nowadays, like From Blood and Ash, The Bridge Kingdom, those sorts of stories, and while they're not bad in any regard, I feel like if you are someone who is looking for a really well-crafted plot that also just happens to contain romance, I think that Burn For Me is a fantastic introduction into the genre. It falls into kind of the urban fantasy, paranormal romance side of things, and I really feel like those tend to be honestly the more successful fantasy romances, so I feel like if you're wanting to maybe dip your toes into the water, I think this would be a fantastic series to start with. Full transparency, paranormal romance is how I got my start in romance. I feel like it's such a great transition, and usually the romances tend to build over the course of the series, if the series is not like, you know, one couple per book. But most, I feel like, paranormal urban fantasy series tend to be one couple and their relationship grows as, you know, the series go on. This one's fantastic. Also, I think if the magic in this one doesn't interest you quite as much, the Kate Daniel series by Ilona Andrews also would be a really good fit. But I'm gonna recommend you to read Burn For Me first. Next up on my list is a book that I recommend for big fans of enemies to lovers stories. Whether that's in a fantasy book or a contemporary book, I think you are really going to like You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogel. Again, this is a book that I've recommended in other romance recommendation videos, but I feel like this is such a good romance for beginners. It's about our two main characters, Naomi and Nicholas, and they have been in a relationship for not a very long time. They've had this kind of like whirlwind romance, and they get engaged, they're planning their wedding together, and Naomi is realizing that the guy that she fell for might not be her perfect match. Nicholas's mom is all up in Naomi's business when it comes to her planning her own wedding, and Nicholas does nothing to kind of help this relationship, and on top of that, he doesn't really do much to get to know Naomi on a deeper level. He just kind of makes assumptions about her and then makes actions based on that, and this starts a growing resentment in Naomi. She is irritated and she's desperate to do anything to break this engagement off. So this story is about Naomi basically fighting Nicholas tooth and nail to get out of this engagement. Whoever breaks off the engagement actually has to pay for the wedding, so Naomi is doing everything in her power to ensure that Nicholas wants to break up with her. And throughout the course of the story, we find out that Nicholas is not very happy in this relationship either, and he is also going to fight against Naomi to break off this engagement. So the story is about them kind of fighting each other and then eventually getting to work out some of the kinks of their relationship and work out some of the issues that they have. Miscommunication is a fairly big trope in this book, but it works so well here. I feel like the way the story is told, it's just so fun. There's a lot of lightheartedness and humor to the story with like a tinge of seriousness as well. The first time that I read this book, I remarked that it read a lot like a thriller, and I will say the writing of the story is very strange, and I think that's part of the reason why I'm recommending it to you. It does not read like a traditional romance, and I think if that's something that kind of gives you the heebie-jeebies, like if the idea of picking up a romance kind of creeps you out because of the writing, I get that. This book does not have typical romance writing, and I think it could really appeal to you. Which isn't to say that like I don't love traditionally published romances or like how they're written, but this one definitely has a different vibe to it. I think if you're someone who is scared to pick up a romance, this might really work for you. On top of that, the sex scenes in this book are not heavily explicit. I think there's like maybe 2, and it's more just like suggested that they have sex from what I can remember. Don't quote me. So if you're looking again for something that's like an introduction and you're not really sure about all of the bumpin' and grindin', this might be a great book for you. So next up on my list, we have Full Tilt by Emma Scott. Now, I know this is a book that I've recommended in other videos. I think I mentioned it specifically in my 6 soft romance recommendations video, but it's one that I feel like still doesn't get enough buzz and enough love, so I figured I would put it on this list as well. This one I feel like is a particularly apt recommendation because as I was thinking about my friends and thinking about the people that I watch on YouTube, I was really considering like the most loved genres and books. For some reason, this one I feel like is a really good recommendation for people who like Kristen Hanna. There isn't that edge of women's place is to suffer like in Kristen Hanna books, but I think if you like a really hard-hitting emotional story, you're really going to like Full Tilt. Also, if you like, you know, YA contemporaries that have kind of a sad bent to them, like The Fault in Our Stars, I think you'll also really like Full Tilt. This story is about Casey and Jonah, who are both kind of facing their own fights individually. Casey is a rock star, and she has kind of fallen on hard times. I want to say at the beginning of the story, she has a little bit of a substance abuse problem. She is really struggling. She doesn't really know what she wants to do, and one night she gets, I think, really, really wasted, and her chauffeur ends up taking her to his own house. Jonah is the chauffeur in this particular circumstance, and he lets her sleep on the couch. This seems like kind of the setup to a horror movie now that I'm mentioning it, but don't worry, Jonah's a cinnamon roll. He does nothing untoward to our heroine. Whenever Casey wakes up, she ends up having a really productive and like good conversation with Jonah, and they end up striking up a friendship. Neither of them are really in the right place to engage in some sort of romantic relationship, so a lot of this book is spent on their friendship and about getting to know each other. I really, really liked seeing each individual character grow through their friendship. Jonah at the beginning of the story is so focused on his passion project, which is glass blowing and having this blown glass art exhibition, like his life's work. And Casey is really focused on getting back on the straight and narrow and kind of just getting her life together, figuring out what she wants out of it. And obviously Casey is kind of the wild child in this scenario, and they both kind of play off of each other. Jonah learns how to loosen up a little bit, and Jonah also teaches Casey how to be a little bit more on the straight and narrow, so they do work together well as a couple eventually. I really loved everything about about this story, and I think Emma Scott does such a fantastic job at not only building well-crafted, individual, unique characters, but also giving you a lot to kind of chew on and sink your teeth into. I feel like I've learned a lot about, I don't want to say life things from reading her books, but in this book I learned a lot about Chihuly glass, which I'd never heard about before. I also learned a lot about comic books and like the making of a comic book in one of her other stories. So she really tries to make the characters as unique as possible, not only in their character traits, but also in the things that they like. So I really can appreciate that about her books. You don't feel like you're reading the same recycled story over and over again. All of her stuff is really fantastic, but specifically Full Tilt is really, really good. And if you want a good cry, you need to pick this book up, because I'm not a crier, but I cried when I read this one. So I think, again, if you're wanting something hard-hitting and you're looking for something just unique and different, I think Full Tilt's really gonna work for you. So this next story is for fans of YA contemporaries or coming-of-age stories, and it is Treasure by Rebecca Weatherspoon. I read this book for the first time this year, and I'm not gonna lie, it really, really took me by surprise. I think that's partially my own fault, but the way that this book was pitched to me was going to be this very, you know, smutty little novella, and it ended up not being that at all. It was very much a coming-of-age story and standing up for yourself kind of story. Treasure is about Alexis and Trisha and their relationship. At the start of the story, Alexis ends up going to a bachelorette party with her sister. It's her sister's bachelorette party specifically, and everyone ends up going to a strip club during the course of a night. Alexis ends up meeting Trisha slash Treasure. Alexis is instantly attracted to Treasure slash Trisha, and vice versa. She ends up having this very steamy, angsty first encounter with her, and despite their feelings and the angst in this one particular scene, they definitely fight it, and they want to keep it professional, if that makes sense. Like, Alexis pays Trisha for a service, and at the end of the night, Alexis goes home, and so they think that's all that they're ever going to see of each other until one day, Trisha and Alexis find themselves in the same computer science class in college. I believe it's Alexis' first year in college, and it's basically their romance from there and how they grow to fall in love. I thought this was fucking delightful. It was told primarily through, I don't want to say primarily, there were a lot of text message conversations that happened between Alexis and Trisha throughout the course of the story. It felt so authentic, and it really reminded me of text conversations that I had with Hayden when we first started dating. On top of that, getting to see Alexis grow so much over the course of the story in becoming more independent and standing up to her parents for what she really wants. I loved also seeing Trisha kind of figure out what she wants in her own life and in her relationship with Alexis. It was just really, really, really good. Now, I will say, unlike most of the other books on this list, there is quite a bit of smut in this novella. Just because it's not only a smutty novella does not mean there was not smut present, because there absolutely was, but I just feel like it was well placed in the story, and it aids in the discovery for both of the women. Like, they're both trying to figure out what they want. I think this is Alexis's first encounter with a woman and or first like sexual encounters in general, so I felt like they were well placed in the story. Just generally speaking, it was so fantastic. Overall, I feel like you really need to pick up Treasure. And then my last book recommendation on this list is for fans of true crime or Criminal Minds. This is also for people who click on my channel or consistently watch my videos but say there's absolutely no way I could ever read romance. This is the book that I think could persuade you to pick one up. The Cardigans is the first book in this sort of episodic series by Cole McCade, and it is focused on two gentlemen who I believe are homicide detectives. We have Malcolm, who is a veteran on the force. He is kind of rough and tumble, but a really good guy. He has a really good heart. He is faced with a new partner on the team. He is kind of a hotshot, but also very like cold and doesn't reveal a lot about himself. His name is Songjae. They have to team up to solve a crime, a mystery, if you will, in this romance. And it is so, so good. Firstly, the writing in this book is absolutely superb. It sets the tone and the mood so right for the story. I believe the story itself is set in Baltimore, and the way that Cole describes the city and describes the setting of the story, it just gives you all of the gritty, moody, I don't want to say angsty vibes, but let me tell you, it sets the tone perfectly. And then on top of that, you get this delicious tension built between our two main characters. Nothing truly romantic happens in this first book, which again, I think is something that might tempt y'all who don't normally read romance to pick this book up, but I love the general tension that is built between our two main characters. You really are desperate to know a little bit more about Songjae's past and why he has come to Baltimore to be a homicide detective, and you also are just curious about Malcolm and his past as well. As much as he is not supposed to be the mysterious one, you definitely still want to know more about his backstory as the course of the story goes on. On top of that, the mystery aspect to this book genuinely gave me chills, so I feel like if you're wanting a really well-rounded story that's not just character driven, I think you're really going to enjoy this. And again, I think this is a great recommendation for non-romance lovers, and I really do think it's a sneaky way for me to get you to read romance, so job here is done. But that is it. Thank you so much for watching this video. In the comments down below, if you are a veteran romance reader, I would love to know what beginner romances you recommend, so that way anyone who is new to romance has a lot of new things they can pick up besides what I just mentioned in this video. And if you are new to romance, I would love to know which of these books has interested you and sparked your interest in romance. But that is it for me. Love y'all so much. Thanks so much for watching, and until next Sunday.